Hi, and welcome to Boardroom Alpha's podcast, Know Who Drives Return. I'm your host, Joanna Macris, and today we're really excited to get a close-up look at a company that's really at the epicenter of the green energy movement and an interesting one on our radar as a pure-play ESG investment. Joining us today is Gregg Dixon, CEO of Voltus. Voltus, as you may know, recently announced it will go public via a SPAC merger through Broad-Scale Acquisition Corp, and that's expected to happen hopefully in the first half of this year. So hi, Gregg, and welcome.
Hi, Joanna. Thanks for having us. Really appreciate it.
Awesome. So we're going to get into some super complicated topics, but let's start by, telling our audience a bit about, who is Gregg Dixon, a bit about your background and how you arrived at Voltus.
Sure. So I started my career in management consulting and went through the dot-com era. Mm-hmm. And during that time, I was exposed to the energy industry. And I was really looking at the time for a greater sense of purpose in the work that I was doing. And through happenstance, I ran across the distributed energy resource industry that was really a fledgling industry back in roughly the year 2000. And it really stimulated in me a deep interest because I grew up with renewable and alternative energy. My dad was a former General Electric engineer that kind of had a passion for this stuff at the very inception. And I found out that that was kind of in my blood. And as soon as I learned about the distributed energy resource industry, I saw that I could make an impact and feel as though every day I had a greater sense of purpose. And 20 years later, I'm still doing it.
Awesome. So before we even get into what is a distributed energy resource, what are the big problems that companies are trying to solve? Like clearly, it's like we're trying to get access to energy and renewable energy. We have mandates to move ourselves to a more renewable world. What are the big pain points that you're trying to solve?
Yeah, so we're at a really important inflection point as a species. Not to get too metaphysical about it, but our modern economies deeply rely on energy and specifically electricity. Unfortunately, our grids are increasingly unreliable. They're increasingly expensive as we upgrade systems that are 50 years past their useful life in some situations. And the grid is ill prepared for the increasing impacts of climate change. So these are massive problems that distributed energy resources in particular, as we get into, are really well suited to solve at scale today.
Yeah. Okay. So there are these distributed energy resources, and I mean, it's not what you might think of. I mean, it's a lot of variety of sources of energy. So talk to us about examples of some DERs first.
Sure. So, it's important to kind of broadly define distributed energy resources as electricity consuming, storing, and producing devices that lie behind an electricity meter. That's kind of the standard definition of these things. And these so-called DERs, they lie in plain sight all around us. They take lots of different forms. They could include electric vehicles, smart thermostats, commercial building management systems, solar and battery storage combinations, on-site or backup generation. And they really, within those categories, they come in hundreds of different use cases. In fact, the phone that I'm using, that maybe you're using, is considered a DER because we can change its state of charge, whether it's consuming electricity or not, when it's plugged in. And we can conceivably do this for hundreds of millions of devices instantaneously and simultaneously to deliver services that make our electricity grids less expensive, more reliable, and cleaner.
Yeah. So let's just say I am big box retailer X, and I'm the person that purchases our energy. What are my problems? What are my stresses? What information am I trying to find? What is my daily struggle?
Sure. Well, your daily struggle is that you are probably a cost center and you're being asked to make more with less, right? This is the constant challenge of capitalism. We are trying to be more and more productive, squeezing more productivity out of every dollar that we invest. And all of our operating expenses. And so if you're trying to manage your energy budget, you're always looking for ways to reduce that budget. One of the challenges, of course, is the complexity of the energy landscape, specifically the electricity market. In the US, in particular, there's 3,300 different electric utilities, and those span 6 entirely different wholesale electricity markets. They all speak a Tower of Babel. It's very complex. And even if you're an energy expert at a big box retailer, it's a very difficult challenge to solve because of its complexity. And so we've built a software platform that allows that energy manager to access the value that is lying fallow in these distributed energy resources, simplify the orchestration and monetization of those DERs, and essentially deliver you a check every quarter for allowing Voltus to orchestrate and monetize those things.
Yeah. So if I were to look at the software as, the energy purchaser, what are the type, what is the information that I'm going to see? I guess I'm going to see where the resources lie, but how do I better understand the ROI or the cost effectiveness? I mean, just walk me through kind of how I play with the software and understand it.
Yeah. So, a lot of customers, they make use of the software, but the software is for both. It's essentially it's a cloud-based software platform that manages a two-sided market. And I think we'll probably talk about the Airbnb example, but on one side of the market, you have electricity markets that would traditionally be buying power from central power stations. And now they can buy aggregations of these DERs in the form of what's known as a virtual power plant using the Voltus platform. So on one side, the software is integrated into these electricity markets. Those electricity markets are sending signals to power plants, including our virtual power plant. On the other side of this two-sided market are the owners of these distributed energy resources that are lying fallow behind their meters that Voltus comes in and essentially enables. We connect our technology to those DERs. The data and the control plane of that technology, the customer gets access to. So all of a sudden, what they see, as a simple example, is their electricity consumption in real time on our software platform. So they open a browser and they see it there. We'll use the big box retailer throughout this conversation. They see exactly how much electricity that one store or an aggregation of stores is consuming. That information in and of itself is extremely valuable. They also see what distributed energy resources we are connected to, what the software is actually able to control and orchestrate. Simultaneously, they see what electricity markets need from those DERs. So there might be price signals that they're seeing. They might see dispatches of those resources and know that the DER is, for instance, discharging its power from an energy storage unit, or an on-site generator is being used to deliver grid services. All of that information is available to our customers and their teams so that they know exactly how those DERs are being monetized and used.
Yeah. I mean, at a high level, it sounds like back in the 90s, kind of the wholesale bandwidth exchange brokers, except this is obviously a lot more complex. Like, is the value in the brokerage and the connecting?
Well, I'll use the Airbnb example. I'll start to use it because I think it's, due to the complexity of electricity markets, this analogy is so fitting and it's easier for people to understand. So, you and I might have a home or apartment that we want to get some side gig value for. We could, of course, manage that process, but it's challenging. Or we could use Airbnb, enter some information, and Airbnb is going to connect me to the market, right? And our software platform essentially takes all that complexity out of this problem for a customer that may know that they have an on-site generator and it lies fallow. It doesn't do anything for 99.9% of the year. By working with us, we layer in our technology and we essentially turn it into a cash register, no different than Airbnb does that for your home or apartment. You choose to rent it out. Airbnb cuts you a check. It ends up on the dashboard right in your bank account. We do the exact same thing for customers, connecting them to the market. And essentially, we're a toll road, right? We take a portion of that value exchange, where Airbnb takes roughly 15% of that value exchange. If you rent out your home for $200 a night, they're going to take $30. We take 40% of that exchange.
Yeah. How much of the interest is driven by cost savings versus moving towards ESG mandates? I'm kind of curious about that.
Yeah, my answer may it may be a little controversial. I've been in this industry for 20 years, and I've always said that customers participate in DER programs for 3 reasons: money, money, and money. And of course, there's a tremendous amount of ESG value, but customers have important business goals to achieve. And first and foremost, it's the economics that they are attracted to for connecting their DERs into these markets. Now, of course, these aggregations of virtual power plants are literally the cleanest resources that grids can employ to deliver electricity and satisfy demand, because we're using resources that are otherwise lying fallow, right? The whole notion of reduce, reuse, recycle is really embodied in our business model.
Yeah. Can we talk a little bit about maybe a case study? I mean, you've talked about Home Depot, for example, or any company that you want to mention, and how they're how they're using the platform, and what they may have said about ROI, or just kind of their reflections on what you've done.
Yeah, so it's important to note the ROI is instant, right? It's the denominator, the cost, if you will, is zero, so it's infinite, because our customers don't pay us. We install our technology for free. We manage those resources in the market. We take care of all that complexity. We bear the risk of those resources in market. So in terms of ROI, it's really infinite, and it's instant. Using the big box retailer example, going back to the challenges that they face, they know that they have these DERs that they're investing billions of dollars in, right? So if you're a big box retailer, let's say you're a retailer that has 5,000 stores in the US and Canada, you probably know which one I'm referring to. They are investing billions of dollars in DERs with a primary use case that's actually not to get side gig value from them in wholesale power markets, right? They're investing in backup generation because of Winter Storm Uri. They want to be the store that continues to operate despite the effects of climate change. They are investing in EV charging because they want to attract the Ford F-150 Lightning shopper. They're investing in solar plus storage because it's good economics. It's a good bargain for that store. They know that they can get side gig value from connecting those DERs into these markets, but they have to automate all of it because they don't want the store manager in, say, Arkansas, running into the back room, flipping switches on machines when an electricity market sends a signal that they need to make use of that resource. And so they have to automate it from what we call the machine to the meter to the market to the money that ends up in their accounting system, for allowing a technology to automate it end to end. Otherwise, they just can't do it at scale. It's too complex. And so we keep that value proposition, no cost, no risk. It's a value sharing arrangement, and we take care of all of the complexity for them.
So it seems like, a big part in the value of what you do is maintaining this topology of where all the DERs live, right? And so how do you, as a company, how are you building that, the pool of the topology, or the database? How do you do that?
Yeah. So, these DERs number in the millions and will be in the billions eventually. For instance, just in the US, I want to say there's 50 million Wi-Fi smart thermostats, right? That's one out of hundreds of use cases. There will be tens of millions of electric vehicles on the road in the US, and certainly hundreds of millions globally. And there's hundreds of use cases of these DERs. DERs have a whole host of characteristics that can be broken down into operational and economic attributes, which is really where the magic of our software platform connecting the two sides of the market comes in. For instance, if you look at electric vehicles, lithium-ion battery, operationally at any given point, because they're all connected to the internet, we can extract data from it, like its state of charge. Is it charging? At what power level is it charging? How long will it take to complete its charge? What what will the driver of that vehicle allow it to be used for? Perhaps they set aside 20% of its capacity for these grid services. Economically, we may know how much it costs for the power it's consuming to charge and what the current electricity market price is that they may be willing to discharge the battery for. It's with that basic set of economic and operational data that the software then figures out how to deliver to electricity markets a product through a virtual power plant aggregation that market is willing to pay for. And that's really where the magic and the fun comes in, building this thing out to scale.
Yeah. So there's kind of like this two-part process of Voltus pays the corporation to have access into, insight into their resource management, right? And then the customers are paying to use your platform. Is there ever any reticence on the behalf of a corporate in sharing their, resource information to Voltus?
Well, no, I mean, we take security, information security extremely seriously. We recognize just how sensitive any customer information is, and we comply with all regulations in that regard. And we have a compliance and regulatory team that ensures that our security is, meets world-class standards. So any customer is sensitive about data, and we make sure that it is kept safe.
But you also know, if I'm using lots of dirty energy, you'll know this, right? So I just was wondering, it exposes corporations to, what they're actually doing behind the scenes.
Well, it's interesting because, the atom, if you will, the electron that's wiggling in our electric wires at any given point, we only know what the emissions profile of that is, generally at an aggregate level, on a regional level, what power is being injected into the grid. Of course, there are all kinds of synthetic power purchase agreements. Of course, there's on-site renewable energy that could be feeding into a customer. But that kind of information is not something that we would get out of an electric meter per se. We would know it at a grid level, but it's not something that would necessarily compromise or could compromise a customer.
Yeah, I only say that because there seems to be very little transparency from the corporate world about their energy consumption and, particularly their movement towards, green alternatives.
Yeah, I think, the fact is that's much more a function of they generally don't even know how to measure the emissions of the power that they're consuming, rather than attempting to kind of hide the ball, if you will.
Yeah. Okay. Let's dive into the business model a little bit. It sounds like it's a software as a service model, but you walk us through what it looks like.
Sure. So there are four numbers that define our business model: 50, 40, 15, and 25. On average, a megawatt, which is our kind of standard unit of measure for the business model, generates $50,000 per year in recurring revenue. And the way that model works is it is a function of what the market pays to Voltus, and then a percentage of that value that we share with the customer. So it's a negative working capital model, in the sense that we're paid before we actually incur our cost of goods sold, which is the 40%, or the 40% gross margin. 60% of the value that we generate from these DERs in the market flows through to the customer. So that's about $30,000 per year of recurring value that the customer gets, and Voltus keeps about $20,000 per megawatt per year of recurring margin. It costs about 15% of that $50,000 per megawatt per year of revenue to acquire the customer, build our product, and manage those customers in these markets. And at scale, we generate about a 25% recurring EBITDA margin.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like it's a very asset light business model, right?
It's super asset light. We don't have any supply chain risk like, say, a solar developer or an energy storage developer might have. We're simply enabling resources that are in the ground today.
Yeah, and I would imagine low churn, because I don't understand, why a customer would churn once they're onboarded, right?
Yeah, we have 100% plus customer value retention rate. and all that really means is that at the end of a customer contract term, they're adding more DERs into the next contract. So they might be participating with, say, 10 locations when we first sign them up, but then when they renew, they want to add 10 locations, or they have added 10 locations in the middle of that contract term, or they've added more DER megawatts, or they're participating in more programs in existing markets. So there's a whole host of ways to increase the same store sales, if you will.
Yeah. Thinking a little bit about the SaaS model, and I think you mentioned like a 40% or so gross margin. And I'm just thinking about, and it's not a direct comp, but other SaaS-based business models that have like 80% margins. There's different companies. In terms of your valuation, like you're not an energy, you don't want that in energy infrastructure valuation. You are more akin to the software as a service kind of players. How can that margin expand over time, or what are the levers to profitability?
Yeah, so a lot of folks might compare that 40% to net revenue versus gross revenue. So we get paid and our revenue is represented by the gross dollars the grid or utility pays us for these aggregations of virtual power plants. We then pass on to roughly 60% to the customer. That's where you get the 40% gross margin. Some might consider that 40% a net revenue number. So where Airbnb may be taking 15% of the transaction value, their gross margin of whatever it is, 80%, is based on the 15% net revenue, right? And so it really, you can look at it either way. It's, the money flows just the same though.
Yeah. What are kind of your strategic priorities right now as a company? I would imagine it's kind of expanding knowledge of who you are and getting traction within the corporate, world to get more DER knowledge. What are you up to?
Yeah, at the highest level, there's expected to be 2.4 million megawatts of DERs globally. Now, to put that into perspective, the entire coincident peak electricity demand in the United States is 800,000 megawatts. So globally, there's 2.4 million megawatts of DERs expected to be online by 2030. It costs about $20,000 to acquire each megawatt. So if you do the math, it's $48 billion of capital just to enable that market. It's a massive, massive market. It's a $120 billion annual recurring revenue market. Incidentally, Airbnb's total addressable market is about $100 billion per year. And so our strategic priorities really are focused on that North Star. It's a massive market. We're right at the inception. We intend to be the world's leading provider, the operating system for these DERs, no matter what the market is, no matter what the DER type is. And so when you look at the use of proceeds from our de-SPAC, what you'll see is, number one, lather, rinse, repeat. Just continue to build out our sales team in every market, bringing this great value proposition and product market fit to those customers. The second is to take the show on the road, so to speak. Every international market is clamoring for the value of DERs, no differently than domestic markets, for all the same fundamental reasons. And the third is there's a whole new class of DER technology partners that are coming online at scale that are just astounding. So as a simple example, and not included in the 2.4 million megawatts of total addressable market, are electric vehicles. In the United States alone, by the year 2030, there's expected to be 2 million megawatts in lithium-ion batteries in American cars. By the year 2030, that is a massive, massive amount of power. That's more than 2 times the combined capacity of all US central power stations. And so we need to capture all of those DERs onto this platform and deliver grid services to them.
Yeah. What is the competitive landscape? It seems to me like it's zero. It's either legacy way of doing things. And why is it not in the interest of a Con Ed to do a better job at giving access and brokering, electricity across partners?
Yeah, so, we kind of break the competitive landscape down into 2 fundamental categories. There's energy companies, traditional energy companies, and there's technology companies. Our differentiation is that we are uniquely both. We have very deep domain expertise in energy, and we have a world-class modern tech stack technology team that has created a set of innovations that really unlocks the full potential of this market. To answer your question specifically about a Con Ed or a utility, they're not innovation companies, right? And they're regionally focused. And so, some utilities deploy demand response programs locally, but it's very hard for a Con Ed to call up, say, a big box retailer in Atlanta or Bentonville and say, hey, you want to participate in my program? It's just not the way that they're set up. They don't develop their own technology. And so utilities really need somebody else to bring the technology to their market to really extract the full value of these things.
Yeah. So you're coming to market at an interesting time, like from a macro perspective, but you also chose the SPAC route. So I wanted to know, what the board and management was thinking about, timing and choosing the SPAC route to come public.
Yeah. So, we built a team and a technology to go after a world championship. And when, 12, 18 months ago, you could SPAC a lemonade stand. It was, we were the subject of a lot of discussion. We were a very high quality target, right, for SPACs. And we were probably too early for a traditional IPO process with trailing revenues of 25 million in 2020, going to, we recently announced 47 million in revenue in 2021. But at the time we began the process in, I guess the April timeframe, about a year ago in 2021, traditional IPO process we were probably too early for it. Mm-hmm. Choosing a SPAC made sense for both offense and defense. We need to move faster. This market is massive. We cannot affect a full clean energy transition to nothing but renewable energy unless we have the full adoption of DERs to be a backstop and balancing resource that fills the valleys and clips the peak of renewables. And so recognizing that a SPAC would be a great vehicle to raise a lot of capital quickly at a very attractive valuation, it made sense. Defensively, you also have to consider that if you could SPAC a lemonade stand, an unworthy competitor might come into the market, get a bunch of cash, and be disruptive. Yeah. So, we looked at it from both ways. We knew we were going to be a public company at some point, and it made sense at the time.
Yeah. And how is life with the SEC right now? Have you sensed any recent tightening, like post, it's at, kind of there's been a high level, messaging that things are going to get a lot more difficult?
Yeah, I think the SEC is doing a great job of looking closely at these investments and protecting consumers. Our process with the SEC has been great. Of course, that probably has entirely to do with the fact that our chief legal officer is incredibly experienced in this field, and our outside counsel, Latham, is incredibly experienced doing these things, and have had the benefit of bringing dozens of SPACs to market. And so our process has been informed by that, and I would say it's been very smooth. Now, with recent news, I think it's going to get tighter. But I really couldn't speak to that, given that we're at the tail end of the process.
Yes, sure. Given we've been talking a lot about ESG, I wanted to give the company a bit of a shout out. You have made your commitment to diversity and inclusion very, very clear. So I would love for you to just give us a sense of, some of your corporate mandates and your inclusivity, certainly of women and diversity in your board.
Well, it's very simple. It's the best business outcome, right? If you want the best business outcomes, you need the best team. And in order to have the best team, you have to have the broadest talent pool. Talent is normally distributed. It's normally distributed among gender and among race and among geography. And so it's a simple matter of casting into all of the talent pools where you're gonna get the best talent. I'd love to say that it has a higher moral calling than that. It's just a simple business decision. It's like if 50% of the world is female, then 50% of the candidates that we're looking at to join our team should be female. Yeah, it's not complex.
Thumbs up. What's on your mind now? Like, we're I guess you sounds like you're on track for first half of the year. What are your near-term priorities?
Well, to be honest, my near-term priorities are really just this de-SPAC process and really planning for out years. So, because we have a recurring revenue model at this time of the year, there's not a lot that I can do personally as a CEO to affect our 2022 results. Like, the team's got the reins, and they're an incredibly talented, capable team. Really, what I focus my time on day to day, other than the de-SPAC process, is making sure that we secure our 2023 and beyond financial performance, that we're attracting the right partners, we're penetrating the right markets, we're scaling the business, that we're looking forward in terms of talent acquisition, which in a tight labor market is always our biggest challenge. And so day to day is all about 2023 and beyond.
Yeah. And I just am thinking about, what you'll look like as a public company when you first come out. So many of the de-SPACs are these pre-commercialization, pre-revenue earnings. We don't know when it's going to happen, right? When I think about Voltus, the model is very clear, and the SaaS-based model, really, you can visualize profitability pretty quickly.
Yeah, we're very unique in that way. I feel a little bit like we may be screaming into the wind in a market that's pretty sour on SPACs. I mean, let's face it, we're seeing very high redemption rates. But I think you rightfully point out that, well, number one, this isn't our first time to the rodeo. And number two, we have very proven business unit economics. We have a proven track record of growth. We crushed our numbers in 2021. We are executives that have brought a company public before. We are incredibly experienced in this industry. And so we'll see, we'll see how the trust, views the investment that they've made and what our redemption levels will be. We're very confident, but it is a tough SPAC market.
Yeah. What does Voltus look like 5 years from now?
I hope the same thing, to be honest. The mission that we have is an incredibly important mission that, frankly, will take decades to come to fruition. It's such a massive market. And my hope is that we're really doing more of the same, but in more innovative ways and at much greater scale and speed.
Awesome. Well, Gregg, we're really thrilled to have you here, and excited to see you come out of the gate, hopefully very soon. And it was a pleasure.
Likewise, Joanna. Thanks for the time. I appreciate it.
Take care.